Before we start, I need to say something about the restriction order in respect of this witness. I understand that you have no objection to the branch post office in which you have worked being made public. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So in the restriction order which I made, the publication of the branch might have led, or it could be construed as leading, to the possibility of identifying the witness. But in the light of the fact that the witness is happy for the branch to be named, everyone should understand that the restriction order is varied to the extent that I permit the naming of the branch in which the witness has worked and or is working. Ms. Hodges, is there anything else I need to say, or does that cover it?
Thank you, sir.
Fine.
So we're hearing this afternoon from a witness who, as you say, has been granted anonymity by order dated 3rd of February 2022. I'm going to refer to this witness as witness 0281, which is the reference number for the statement which he has provided to the inquiry.
Stand up, please, and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
As you know, my name is Catriona Hodge, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. We know you as witness 0281. You made a statement on the 3rd of February of 2022, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Do you have a copy of that statement in front of you?
I do.
Please could you turn to the final page, which is page 26.
Yes.
Do you see your signature there in the middle of the page?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to reread that statement since you first made it?
I have, yes.
Is the content of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
I'm going to begin by asking a few questions about you. How old are you?
I'm 61 years old.
I don't want you to state your full address, but can you indicate where in the country you are from?
In Bristol.
You were previously married, is that right?
That's correct.
For how long were you married?
I was married for 10 years, but I was in the same relationship for going on to 14 years.
You have 2 children, is that right?
That's correct.
How old are they?
At the present moment, 14 and 13.
What did you do for a living before you worked for the post office?
I was a business person. I had a number of properties. I had a number of restaurants. I renovated properties, bought and sold properties, and I was very comfortable and successful.
Why did you later decide to apply to be a subpostmaster?
I was cash poor and collateral rich, in a sense, and I was coming to that point in life that I wanted some regularity, and I had a few friends in the post office network, and I don't know why, but I started investigating and finding out, and it was regular hours, and the income varied, and I was intrigued, and I was looking for a new venture.
What did you hope to achieve by working for the post office?
Well, I hope to be successful and to be stable, which I was already, but successful, and that's what I wanted, to be successful.
Prior to your appointment, you attended 3 interviews with representatives of the Post Office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you know why you were asked to attend 3 separate interviews?
I don't know why, but it seemed that that was the way that they were conducting their business. And if they wanted to interview me, I was quite happy because I got nothing to hide, and interviews are there to scrutinize and to find a good character of person, as I've done many interviews in my time.
In which year did your appointment as a subpostmaster begin?
My appointment started in the middle of 2006.
What attracted you to the branch which you took on?
There were a number of branches available through the franchise option, but I did not want to be having a 1 counter or a 2 counter type business. I wanted to have the income as being the main income, and any side business that I had in the premises would be a complementary to the customers. But it was a salary which had attracted me in this particular branch.
What arrangements were made in relation to the purchase of the branch?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because the subpostmaster before I took the premises was already suspended. And in effect, while the branch had a value, there wasn't a value because there was no goodwill of anything to purchase, as I was guided through a number of companions that I had. But I did invest up to £86,000 on renovating the so-called flagship, because they were looking to branch out, and they were looking for recruitments who were thinking out of the box, who were keen, and the post office was looking to rebrand its brand. So my initial investment was £86,000 at the time.
What was the name of the branch?
The name of the branch is Westbury-on-Trim in Bristol.
Can you describe that branch to us, please, how it was when you took it over?
Well, it was a very traditional building. It was a very dilapidated office. It was a main post office, but not a Crown office. There was only 1 or 2 items which we weren't able to do, which separated me from the Crown office. But it was a dilapidated office with 6 counters. And it was a busy office because it was a main office in the vicinity.
You've explained it had 6 counters. So it was a relatively large office, was it?
Yes. Compared to the other post offices in the area, yes, it was a it was the main post office. It was known as the main post office.
What was the annual turnover of the branch?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to answer that question, but if the chair allows me,
What are you concerned about in answering it?
well, we live in a blame society, and I supposedly have signed a contract of information. I think, the Secret Act.
Well, all right, so that we don't get too bogged down, was the turnover very many millions per year?
Well, if you allow me, sir,
Well, the thing is,
it was
I
well
don't
over
want to-
30,000, 30
All right,
30
that's
million.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you. Can you please describe the type of business that you operated from the branch?
When I took over, I was still running the same branch as it was traditionally, and out of the 6 counters, there were 4 always were open. One was a foreign currency counter, which we kept it separate because of the importance. Sorry, could you repeat that question again?
I asked what type of business you were operating from the branch.
Yes, it was post office business and post office products, and I was a stationery business, which was the retail part, which was only complementary. It wasn't the main focus. If somebody didn't have a pen, didn't have an envelope, those little things were there to purchase. But my main income was, the driving force was the post office products as it was.
How many staff did you employ to assist you in running the branch?
Well, in the middle of June, when I took over, I think I had about 5 or 6 staff. They didn't all work full time. The hours varied to their convenience and to the convenience of the business. There was no strict order but we had all 4 counters opening. So in effect, yes, I had 4 staff in the morning or 4 staff in the evening.
Where did you live when you worked for the post office? You don't need to give me an address, but were you? Was there a residential part to the premises, or did you have your own home?
The business was operated from a commercial office. I lived away from the business premises.
That's fine, thank you. In relation to your training, what training did you receive when you were first appointed?
Well, I think that's where the problem started. Initially, it's supposed to be 2 weeks office-based training, but mainly it was all product driven, and that's all I can remember. There was no specific amount. Specifically, it was just general, because whilst I was there were, I think, 4 or 5 other persons, and some came, some didn't. It varied. I can't remember.
Did your training ever cover how you should resolve shortfalls when you were balancing your accounts?
There was no training about shortfalls, because it was assumed that there would not be any shortfalls. We were more taught on what products to upsell and what was the flavor of the month product, and it was all more product training and how to change the till roll and how to feed the printer labels, because it was at the time when labels were coming in and stamps were also being provided at the same time.
Did you raise questions about the Horizon system with your trainer?
I raised a lot of questions at my point of training, so-called training. I raised a lot of questions, and I was told that I was asking too many questions, and everything would be revealed, and that's how they operated.
How adequate was the training in preparing you to operate the Horizon system?
It was not adequate, because in proportion to the other people were there at the same time being trained, it was generalized, because some were having small offices, some were having a convenience shop with one counter, and I had a large office. So it wasn't specifically, it was just general, broad-based training.
Did you ask for further training?
I requested, and I said I'm not comfortable. You know, you're asking me to take on something, and I was not comfortable. I allegedly spent a lot of time asking questions which didn't need to be answered, because it will all come clear once I take on the office.
Did you receive any additional training from the post office?
Yes, there was one trainer who was shadowing me, because I was taking on the branch which was already functioning, which had a stand-in manager or managers, I can't remember. The staff, all the other staff they were already there for quite a number of years. So I was the only one which was being trained, and I was being shadowed by a so-called trainer.
You've mentioned that at the point at which you took over running the branch, the previous subpostmaster had been suspended. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you know why the subpostmaster had been suspended?
No. Again, it's coming back to I was asking too many questions scenario. I just like to know why people left, and what was the reasons. So no, it was never explained to me, but the chips started falling down when I took over the office, because the staff that I had already had a history of events which I was updated in the first week of taking over.
What were you told?
Well, I was simply told that the person previous was suspended for a large amount of shortage of money. Why, how it happened, it's out in the media. There are different ways to look at it, but it didn't concern me, and I was told, you know, it doesn't. I don't need to know.
Did you experience unexplained shortfalls when using the Horizon system?
Yes, on the very first day of cashing up, things were not right. There was a shortage, if I remember, on my till, a number of other tills. But from my past experience of my own running my business, I used to have a in-house daily book, as I like to call it. And I understand that human nature is that, you know, accidentally you give out £1 too much or take in £1, you know, and and I had allowed in my own mind £5 a week per person to have a discrepancy, which it was a large office and human errors occur. So we used to put it down in a name, and whether it was a plus or a minus sign, the amount of shortfall or if it was up.
What efforts did you make to identify the cause of shortfalls shown by Horizon?
Sorry, could you ask me that question again, please?
Yes, of course. What efforts did you make to identify what had caused shortfalls in your account shown by the Horizon system?
Well, I was restricted by the organisation. Firstly, the first week I had a trainer, auditor, whatever they're called, training me and showing me, and he didn't look shocked to see a discrepancy on my first day on one or two of the tills. And it was small amounts, which didn't warrant me to be overly concerned, because I was assured that it all balances out at the end of the week. I took that on board.
Did you contact the helpline for support when you experienced discrepancies?
Well, not for the first week or two, because I had so-called a trainer, and it was a large office. He did most of the checking, and there were shortages. And he made all the adjustments and inquiries, but after he left, I was thrown in the deep, and I had staff to guide me, and I called the helpline, which shouldn't be called a helpline.
How often did you contact the helpline, do you think?
Every day. It was a large office, and I was brainwashed into that everything has to balance and cashed up by 6 o'clock or 6:30 when everything shut down. So, there was a lot of pressure that I had to balance. And I think by 7 o'clock we would balance, because it was still first 3-4 weeks, and I was just settling in. How often would I call the helpline? Every day. Because there were things that I didn't understand. There were discrepancies that occurring which I didn't understand. The staff were also confused, but they were already working the system before I got there, the staff. So they knew some sort of history, which they were permitted not to discuss with me for some reason, but there were discrepancies from day one.
What was the nature of the advice that you received from the helpline about how to resolve these discrepancies?
Well, in the very early days, there was a lot of anxiety. The helpline, so-called the helpline, was supposed to help us. They guided me to press F1, F3, go on to the next screen, and then, and then if there's shortage, don't worry, cash up, and it'll adjust itself tomorrow. And
what do you mean by cash up?
A cash up, meaning at the end of each day, the office, because I had a number of staff, each staff had its own unit, so they had their own cash drawer in a sense. If they started work at 9, finish at 1, then they would finished one, and then they would cash up and then balance their till accordingly, and then they would put their till away into a secured, safe type drawer system. So at the end of the day, we would have 3 counters, and then we'd close the door, and everybody would cash up their monies, and there were discrepancies, even a fortnight after the trainer had gone. There were still discrepancies. I couldn't understand.
You've described discrepancies arising day to day in individual tills. What would happen when you came to the end of a trading period? Did you experience shortfalls at that stage?
Well, that question needs to be answered in 2 separate parts. The trading period was always a Wednesday to a Wednesday, and the reason why traditionally post offices close on a Wednesday was half day was that it took them the rest of the half day to cash up all the monies because it was paper based. So traditionally it was a Wednesday to a Wednesday, and our first day started on a Thursday morning. Then that was a weekly cash up, a daily cash up, and then there was a weekly cash up, and there was a monthly cash up. So whatever discrepancies you had on a day-to-day basis would roll over into the week, and then the Wednesday would finish, and then if there was any discrepancies, it would roll over into the next month, and there were 12 months, and each month had a different Wednesday to coincide with a certain branch. So my end of the month could be a Thursday, but not necessarily the rest of the whole of the Bristol branch, because we all had an A, B, C, D type graph, and then we would know which day was our end of the month, and everything had to be balanced and made good.
And what do you mean by made good in this context?
Well, made good simply meant that if there was any shortfalls or discrepancies, made good, because the post office had the attitude that their system was correct and proper, and if there was an error, it would be a human error, and I was responsible for the branch. I was coached into this position unknowingly, now that I know what I know, and made good was if there was a shortfall, I had to balance it in order to roll over into the next new month. But majority of the time was always a couple of £100 loss, which seemed odd, but allegedly I signed a contract that it was my responsibility to make sure that the post office there's no losses. So that's what I mean by make good.
Did you ever challenge the post office about your duty to make good these shortfalls?
I started challenging the post office from day one. I asked a lot of questions. How can it be that my experienced staff are having discrepancies? At no point did I ever think my staff were stealing, because it was the way I had worked it. It was well organized and very transparent, and they were experienced staff. No, the staff that come into the post office are not in for the stealing. They just wanted a comfortable hours and a comfortable job with a start and a finish time and some stability.
You've mentioned reporting discrepancies to the helpline. You've also said now you raised your concerns. With whom did you raise your concerns?
Well, I raised my concerns with the helpline because they were the only people that I was able to look to or get in touch with. There was nobody else other than my contracts manager. But I did not get in touch with him. I raised it with the helpline and made sure that they raise it.
Do you know whether the post office made any inquiries when you raised concerns about shortfalls and discrepancies?
I don't know what inquiries they made because it was always a very hush-hush kind of establishment, and I don't know what inquiries they made.
You've explained that you made good these shortfalls. Did you do that by paying money into the till? Or did the post office make deductions from your wages? Or was there some other method of making good?
I made good from my own funds, which, again, there was a retail part of the business, and I made good. And that's all the post office was concerned, that if there was any discrepancies, that they needed to be made good.
So when you say you made good from the retail side, you were using your retail business
Yes,
to
the retail side, and also I had some personal monies, I had a number of properties with a number of rentals coming in, and everything else was on my business plan when I put the business plan into the business when I was interviewed. So I made good. I can't remember from which sources, but it was either from the retail or from my personal money that it came from.
How much do you think you paid in total to make good shortfalls shown by the Horizon system?
How much money have I made good from the point I started to now? I have spent in excess of around about £90,000 making good of alleged shortages.
I appreciate that's an estimate.
Yes.
Did you keep records of the shortfalls that you were experiencing?
Yes, we kept records of the shortfalls, but nobody cared. Nobody came. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to know about. I just kept my own personal records, but I don't have them now. But I remember I was very thorough. You know, I'm not highly educated in any sense, but I know how to +1 = 2 and not, some other odd number. Yes, I had a daily record, a monthly record. We kept everything, and it was all transparent. Any member of staff could come and have a look at the time, should they want to. And that's the way I worked.
I'd like to ask you some questions now about your experience of working with the National Federation of Subpostmasters. You've explained that you were a member of the Federation, is that correct?
Shamefully, I was a member of the Federation of Subpostmasters. Shamefully.
Did you have any formal role or responsibility within the Federation?
From the very offset, I was a member from the very first day I started work. And I went to a number of meetings when they were held. Then they were localized, and then there were regional areas, and then there were central areas. I'm concentrated more on the local areas, and once a fortnight we would have a meeting, or once every 3 weeks we would have a meeting locally.
You've described providing support to other subpostmasters. What did they tell you about their experiences of using the Horizon system?
I was thrown into the role by the so-called Federation, and I was happy and eager to help everybody and anybody in the Federation, so-called. And when we went to meetings and there were concerns raised, I would try to understand them and just relay my information to the Federation at the time.
To whom did you communicate your concerns within the Federation?
Well, it was all localized, so I didn't have any specific named role. There was a local chairman, a treasurer, secretary, and I never had a role other than a representative. So I took the information on and discussed it with the general people who were already in the business, and just generally discussing issues and events that were going on.
Do you recall roughly when you raised concerns with the Federation about Horizon on behalf of other SPNs? Sorry, subpostmasters.
Could I make one little request, please? Could I please ask you to raise your voice, because I'm having trouble hearing you.
I apologise.
But could you ask me that question again, please?
Yes, it was, do you recall when you first raised concerns with the National Federation of Subpostmasters about the problems that you and other subpostmasters were experiencing with Horizon?
Well, yes, I think, within the first month, because there was a role vacant in a sense, because I was running the main office, I was expected to take up a role, and which I was happy to take on, and it was not an issue. I raised the questions and issues with the local members, who presumably were going to take it further up the line, and that was the way the organization was organized. Everybody had a pigeonhole, and they had their boundaries, and that's the way the organization was formed, I believe.
How did representatives of the Federation respond to you when you raised concerns?
Again, I'm astonished and ashamed to understand how this organization, who paraded themselves as a caring and willing organization, but they were under the assumption of there can't be any errors in the system, and it must be a human error, and it was always played down the issue was always played down.
Did you ever speak out to the local press about the concerns that you had?
Well, again, I want to champion a gentleman by the name of Mark Baker, who was the Southwest representative, and I want to champion this gentleman. He was a pillar of strength. I've not met Mr. Bates, but I raised these issues with him. He then supposedly raised them with the Federation further up the chain.
I'm going to move on, if I may, to the audits of your branch. You've mentioned that your branch account was regularly audited. Is that right?
Yes, it was regularly audited, always on a Thursday morning, never in any other day. The reason for that makes sense because all the hard work would have been done. The person in charge, myself or any other post, they would have cashed up and all their stock units would have been balanced or minus or up or down, either way. So they always came unexpectedly, but always on a Thursday morning.
What information were you given about the findings of the auditors once they'd carried out their audits?
Well, in the beginning, I think in my role in the first, fourth, fifth month, the auditors came. I think there were 3 members, very intimidating in the sense of we are the post office, you know, like we're the police and we are coming here to check. And it was very relaxing. They did their job. I would not interfere. It was drawn that they had every right to walk in as and when and check whatever. And yes, so be it. They came, they checked. And so I was quite accustomed to having at least 2 audits a year. Or sometimes 3 was never an issue. It was what it was, and it was what it was at the time. You know, I had a very large safe, and there was a lot of money there. Everything was documented, everything was processed, everything was there. There was no issue. They came, they checked, and then they always said, "We'll come back to you." There were shortfalls. And then I was to discuss it with the helpline.
What would happen in relation to the shortfalls?
Well, there is no explanation to the shortfall. There was no explanation. There was a shortfall, and the system was so perfect that any errors would be a human error or a hands in the till error. And my staff were the most honest people, and there was always a quarterly shortfall, monthly shortfall, but we had to make good.
You've explained in your statement that you took the post office to court in about 2009, 2010. Is that right?
Yes, I took them to court, and I want to emphasize, which is very important, I was taking Post Office Limited to court and not the Crown. But when I discussed that there were these issues, and there were a number of issues, they had a blasé attitude of we're untouchable, do what you want to. And the thinking at the time was also that I was taking the crown to court, which was never my intentions or my thoughts. I was taking a limited company which did not stand up to what it promised and what it was supposed to do. And I had a number of barristers who looked at it and said, yes, we can see, yes, but the way it is, it was a climate, it was the way it was. And it was even said that take it in front of a judge and you will not win it, because the mentality was such that it was the British Raj attitude, which was the carrying on, that we're untouchables, we're right. And I'm afraid I was not successful in that claim, even though there were many good grounds.
To what exactly did your claim relate?
I can't remember because I don't have the information. I remember that I took them to court, and it was only Post Office Limited that I was taken to court and no other bodies. And what claim, I cannot remember now.
What effect did your action against the Post Office have on your relationship with the organisation?
Well, the effect was already downhill from day one, because I was asking too many questions. And so the effect was I was already a thorn in that organization. But all I was a honest person trying to establish that there's lots of issues in the system that I'm not qualified, but there is issues, and it's not my staff, and it's not myself or my partner at the time. There was a system error, but I could not get through.
You've mentioned in your statement your contract was once suspended in December 2007. Is that right?
Yes, it was. It was a shock to my system, degrading. I was suspended. I can't remember the total reason for it, but there was a lot of things going on. Because I was interviewed 3 times in 3 different stages, and I was taking on a large post office, I was suspended for some approximate 14 days at the time. I can't remember for what amount or what reason it was, but it was definitely a shock to my system and my morale at the time.
You've explained that you were suspended again, I think in 2018, is that correct?
That's correct.
After a shortfall was found by an audit of your branch, is that right?
Yes. In the middle of 2018, I was already having life crisis. I was trying to run a large organization, and my lifestyle crises were overwhelming. And on a happy Thursday morning, I had auditors walk in to my branch. I think there were approximately 3 or 4 persons. I can't remember, but it was definitely 3 persons. And they were regular in the sense of they weren't strangers. I knew of them, that they'd been to my branch. Out of the 3, one of them would have been, they were familiar people in their role.
And the discovery of the shortfall led to your suspension, is that right?
Well, before the discovery of the shortfall, I was already telling them that there was an issue of £9,000 of that point in that period of time, not mentioning about the other losses that have occurred. And before my suspension, there was a so-called trainer audit. Some clerk came in just to check out and see things, and but on that fine Thursday morning, I had an audit, and it was still £9,000 short, and I was suspended for reasons.
There was an issue relating to your personal circumstances as well, I understand. Is that correct? You need not go into the detail, but...
Yes, and that's why I paused, because, again, it's very easy for persons to blabber on. But yes, I had personal issues. My life was in turmoil. And then on top of that, I had the audit, and I knew there was a shortfall. I knew, and I called the helpline, and I told them that there was, and they couldn't be, and they were adamant. And then I was given a choice of what I could be suspended for. Do you want me to relate to?
You need not go into the personal circumstances, thank you. How did your appointment come to an end?
My appointment came to an end on that fine Thursday morning, approximately around about 12:30, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I had a conversation with my contracts manager, and I was given a choice of either A or B, but I was going to be suspended.
Forgive me, your appointment ultimately was terminated, is that right?
It was terminated on that day in 2018, yes. By the phone call, and then followed by a special delivery letter confirming my suspension, and paragraph XYZ dot.
I'd like to talk a little bit now about the impact that these events have had upon you. It's your understanding that your contract came to an end on the day of your suspension, is that right?
Just take a little time. There's no rush.
Could you please ask me that question again?
Forgive me, I was simply looking to clarify. You've explained that you were suspended, and I wanted to clarify with you how your contract came to an end. But I think it's your understanding on the day you were suspended, in effect, that brought your contract to an end. Is that right?
Allegedly, I was given a choice of either A or B. I took the latter, B, and my contract was terminated via the phone. Talking to my contracts manager, who I knew of and was familiar with for the duration of the time that I spent in the post office, and it came to an end.
What happened to the post office branch when your contract was terminated?
Well, this is an area that, you know, the policeman of the industry starts kicking in, because the post office area, once I was suspended, I was not allowed to go into that area, which is called the fortress for the layman, which was a secured area, which is but the retail side, I was free because that was my retail side. But the post office was closed for a week after my suspension. Prior to my suspension, I'd been trying to sell the business for a very long time, which was manipulated by the post office. And it boiled down to that I had to find a suitable person who would be suitable to the post office to take over my branch and be gullible. That is the right word. Who would be gullible enough to carry on taking the whipping in a way of the organization. So when I was suspended, it was worthless. But I was suspended, and there was a gentleman in the vicinity who was very keen, who spoke to the contracts manager via the phone. I don't think they ever met. And it was scrutinized, and he passed an interview over the telephone because he had already established business in the vicinity. And I could confirm that he was a genuine person. And he came into the role to take on. But he was a business person and business-minded person who was not wanting to be standing behind a counter all day. Yes, sir, no, sir, okay, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. But he was happy to have its staff managed. So he was already interested in purchasing the business as a going concern. But there were so many issues, it just delayed, and then I was suspended. It was not worth anything. He was available. He was happy to take on, with the understanding quite clearly that I'd still be available to train him and his staff. So whilst I was suspended, it was agreed that I could still go into the post office side to train these two new people in order to keep the flow of the business going. But yet I was suspended, but I was not allowed to be in the post office. But I was there training the new staff and the manager. You know, this is how you can break rules when you're in a big organization who don't care. It was their convenience that it was convenient for me to be there, and I was not. It was known that I was suspended by a number of staff because, you know, staff are staff, and they were always, you know, the next best thing to the newspapers is staff, because they always have their assumption of why, the reasons why. And as I said, I went for the latter paragraph B for my suspension for reasons I've explained. And but I was allowed to go in to train the staff And there was another member of staff who was there as well and training, but, you know, she couldn't be training them and serving the customers. So I needed to be around, and I fitted in, which I was not getting waged for, but I was suspended. It was common knowledge I was suspended, but it was a local village, and the business needs to be opened. That regardless of what goes on, it was convenient for the organization to acknowledge I was suspended, but still allow me to be there to train the staff so the business can still. And I wanted to help because we subpostmasters have not come into this business to steal, to have our fingers in the till. We've put a lot of time and effort and money, and all the subpostmasters, the 99% of the people have been honest, loyal subjects to the organization who only wanted to serve the community. So yes, I allowed for this person to come in. I was advised not to, but I made a personal choice of allowing this person to come in and to keep the post office open and still serve the general public, because the need was there. The people came first. The need of society came first, not my personal lifestyle. And I was advised not to open it and not allow it, and I went against that advice because I did not want my reputation to become a stigma to follow me. So the doors were open regardless of what went on. There were lots of issues going on in my life, and I was suspended, and I was still working and opening the doors and cashing up. And in that very 6 weeks of the gentleman being there, he was already through £2,600 shortage. And I explained to him that at the time, he didn't want to be involved in the organization. The post office was again closed for another 5 or 6 days, and another gentleman came to take over. But I went against the good advice that I was given by a good, respectable gentleman. And I didn't have the energy to challenge the system, but I wanted to keep the office open for the good of the people, for the community, and I failed.
How was your... Forgive me.
Sorry,
I need to apologise.
I didn't hear the question.
How was your health affected by your experience running the post office?
Well, my health was affected from the first day that I signed the contract, so-called employment contract, because I've never ever saw one. I remember signing 2 bits of documents, which supposedly was my employment contract, and another document, the Secrecy Act document. I was diagnosed as diabetic. Diabetes is in my family, which when they were slightly older, it was, you know, it was common, but I was already diagnosed diabetic, and they couldn't understand why. I was on medication, and going beyond into the business as going on, I was advised to be on insulin, which I had one jab. Then going on into the business, I was advised to have 2 jabs, and I was obese. I wouldn't eat anything, but my diabetes was so bad, and I could not explain that to the general public or and to the doctors of what my situation is, because it was a gagging order in effect. I was always drummed into, whenever, you know, apologies for that. It was always dragged into that I've signed a Secrecy Act, and I couldn't discuss my business with anybody outside the organization. So my poor doctors, they did what they could. I was on twice jabs, insulin. It was so bad that they were saying that I had to go and have my 3rd jab in routine of every day. And I was then offered an alternative operation. And I had that alternative operation, and 2 years took for it to settle down, and my diabetes is now controlled. I'm still a diabetic via the operation I had, and but there were other medical issues occurring, which is part of the job stress that I was under. But there was nobody I could talk to. I had the post office so-called managers who just wanted to push their specific product of the month, and they came in, and I have chased a few managers out of the office because I know I have to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have to get changed and ready to go and open those doors. I know I have to serve a number of people. I know I have to close at a certain time, and I know I was self-employed. But these so-called managers who came from fancy jobs previous and were hired, which is fine, but when I asked them, can you explain to me how this shortfall or this has occurred? Oh, well, we'll take it up with the helpline and they'll get in touch. They were not interested. They were only interested in pushing their flavor of the month product. And I'm pleased to tell you that I have chucked a few of those managers out because they had no knowledge of customer service. They had fancy roles, but there were a number of managers. There was one particular manager who said, and I said to him, I said, look, let's be on the level. What is it you're chasing? What product are you looking for? What's the flavor of the month? And he wanted this, and I said, I can do that for you. and his figures had doubled or raised, and his figures were going up. He was a happy bunny, but in return he had made a comment on he could not understand why I was labeled as a difficult person to work with. All I was trying to do was cry out for help to an organization who didn't want to listen. And I'm telling them that there's a problem in the system that I could not explain, and I could not, but from day one, there was a problem. And I had raised the problem up, and I took it to all the levels, and there was nobody there until the point of 2010, when another organization of the trade union organization, under another gentleman who is a very respectable gentleman, came in, and I moved. I was a member of both organizations, the Federation of Subpostmasters and the new TUC or union, but I was allowed to be a member of both organizations. But I championed this other gentleman who had supported me and who knew, and he had a voice that he could speak from a different platform, and he was being challenged by the Federation. He was already the black sheep. He was already.
Who are you referring to?
I'm referring to a gentleman by the name of Mark Baker in the organization.
We're very familiar with Mr. Baker. We've heard a lot of evidence about him from.
I have great respect for the gentleman. He's been taken through the tumble dryer. His health has been affected, but he never let anybody down. He was a pillar of strength, and I want to champion this gentleman.
What effect did the stress you experienced have upon your relationship with your family?
I'm very sorry. I'm having trouble hearing you.
No, I apologise. You asked me to speak up before.
Yes.
What effect did the stress you experienced have upon your relationship with your family?
Well, the stress was divided because I had this operation. I was not able to work and go into the post office, and my partner and my wife at the time was running the business, and then you would have these fancy managers with fancy names pushing their product and emphasize on, what a nice person she is, and she is a nice person, and what great staff that I had, and they couldn't understand why I was so difficult to work with. But my staff were not paying the bills. My staff were not up late thinking about how am I going to find that shortfall, and knowing that there's going to be another shortfall on the next period, on the next new month, and the organization had a lot of influence on my partner and my staff, because I was portrayed as a difficult person and a thorn, and they couldn't understand how I got wonderful staff, and I do agree I have wonderful staff and wonderful people, but I was the one who was carrying the issues which were not getting resolved by the post office Horizon system at the time. The managers were just happy to come in and push the flavor of the month because they were going to get an extra bonus. Regardless whether they came into work or not, they were going to get waged. I know how it's like to put bread on the table.
What steps have you taken to obtain compensation for the losses that you suffered, the money that you paid in to make good shortfalls?
I've made the same steps as everybody else, and I'm part of the 555 group, and whatever was divided, but there was no other avenues to me that I could get my compensation, because this was a big organization and I was already ill health.
How much did you receive in compensation on the settlement of the litigation?
For personal reasons, I don't want to answer that question, but it was the average amount that everybody else had received.
Did it cover the amount that you've explained already you paid in?
No, not even. No, it didn't. It was the leftover of the 555 group, and whatever everybody else received, I received that proportion of the proportion.
How do you now feel about the treatment you received from the post office when you experienced shortfalls shown by Horizon?
Well, I've been abused by the organization, so-called Post Office Limited. They interviewed me. They found my vulnerability, which was I was keen to work hard and to be successful. That's what they were looking for. I joined the organization. As soon as I joined the organization, this organization was not what it was. It was said to be. It was a very close-knit organization, a very tight-lipped organization, and they have mentally abused me throughout my being with the organization. They've emotionally broken me down. They've emotionally broken my marriage, knowingly, because it was not. I allegedly was the only person who had issues in shortages. Out of 11,500 officers, I was the only one. And I know I was not, because I was in the forefront of the local organization where there were people who were scared to bring up the conversation openly, but they were telling me that they were suffering discrepancies. They would not discuss how much or amount, and I can't remember, but I have been abused by this organization, and this is not what I signed up for.
What do you think the post office needs to do to put this right?
Sorry?
Forgive me. What do you think the post office needs to do to put this right?
Well, there are two organizations that need to put things right. Firstly, the post office had an attitude of, we are the police in our organization. What they say is what happened, and what they say is going to happen, and there was no there's no challenge abilities. So what needs to be done? It needs to be an open forum. Everybody should have accountability. As I had said earlier on, when I started the business, it was transparent. Everything was laid out. I had booklets, I had daily records, I had monthly records. Everything's transparent. My staff knew exactly what was going on, And the organization was very arrogant and abusive and it held on to their positions. That needs to be broken down, because the managers who became managers were the guys who were posties, or they were on the shop floor. And because they were nice people and they were nice to the managers, they moved up and got promoted. Nobody had any qualifications. If you're a manager, you must have manageable skills. If you're an accountant, if you're an auditor, you need to have some accountability skills. But most of the organization and auditors were just pals of a pal who knew there was a job vacancy and applied. And it was a close-knit organization. And the other part, on the Federation subpostmasters, for too long, they've all been under the same quilt. How can you have an organization funding another organization to fund their products? The Federation subpostmasters was not a federation. It was a boys' club. And I was a thorn, because I was asking too many questions, but the federation could only be a federation because it was funded by the post office. It was common knowledge that whatever the post office whispered was going to be sanctioned by the federation. Yes, we had conferences, they had different meetings, and everybody had a role, and everybody had a beer or a glass of wine, and it was just from the outside, because I am an outsider looking in. It was a boys' club funded by the big boy who's going to say, there you are, boys, you got your money, you got your funds, now go and enjoy. And the federation would sanction everything that the post office had agreed months ahead. But I and another gentleman and a lot of other people who I consider as outsiders, not only myself and Mark Baker, there were other number of people who stood up and said, no, this is wrong. But the federation was on they're all puppies on a lead. And I challenged and I challenged, and I was broken. They had broken me, and they had abused me. I feel abused. If there's a category somewhere, it should be for the people, the subpostmasters and their families, where they were emotionally abused by this mother organization who had a free fall and could make any decision wanted to. Furthermore, I'd like to ask questions, because nobody's ever answered any of my questions. How is it that out of 11,500 stores, there are only 555 subpostmasters standing up and saying, yes, there was a problem there was a system issue. All the other subpostmasters were hushed up. And I know that from first-hand experience. And some of them were too nervous for all their personal, that they didn't have the time, energy to challenge the organization, and they just rolled over. And I'm sorry, I was not going to roll over, because I came into this business to work hard, to achieve, and I was an honest person, but they portrayed me of being a difficult person. And how can you have shortages? And the very most important thing that nobody's ever brought up in this forum is the Horizon system, as I'm to understand, was bought from NatWest Bank, because going back in 2002 or 4, NatWest Bank went through a renovation, and these units were bought second-hand from NatWest Bank, and they were installed in the post offices. So the main base, what we call the tower, in my office I would have 5 different towers. Those towers were already as old as I was at the time. The reason I call this out is it's important to be established, because when I had the Horizon engineers come over, and they would come to see me at least once a month, because the printer would get jammed, the screen would freeze up, the base unit, as we call it, the base unit would not function. So I already knew what to do, because I had to switch off the base unit, wait 30 seconds or a minute, and reboot it. But we were already handed out second-hand item, and it was quoted, I quote, a Pacific engineer who, a number of engineers came, and they were all, it was, hello, my name, and I already knew them by first name. Yeah, come on in, that unit's not there working, that's not working, that screen's not working. And it was common knowledge that it was already second-hand equipment. All they upgraded was the screen, and the printers were upgraded. And I'm just amazed on the amount of money that the organization Post Office Limited have spent, but they went out and bought second-hand equipment. I'm saying this out loud because it needs to be going on record that I was informed by the Fitsuchi engineers numerous times that this was already chucked out, and it was bought over by Post Office Limited.
Thank you. I've no further questions for you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
There's a lot of things I'd like to add, but it all boils down to, sir, if I may, please be thorough, and please have Post Office Limited and its organization and its people to be accountable. And if you have the authority and the ability to reorganize the federation, because they were just puppies on a leash. Right. And I champion this gentleman, Mark Baker, because he, like I and like many others who stood up as a group of 555, as we've known, who stood up and were able to challenge. If you can break this foundation and tell them to rebuild, everybody should be qualified. A manager cannot be a school leaver who's been school leaving and then suddenly become a manager, unless he's gone into training, got some organ. But majority of the people were just friends of friends who knew there was a vacancy, pal of my pal, and it was that kind of organization.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for your evidence. I'm pleased that you were able to come and explain all these things to us. I'm going to leave in a moment, and everybody else will leave, and then you can leave last, so to speak. All right? So thank you again.
I thank you.